Well, how do more women in politics change the game? Half of Carla Beck's 22 newly elected NDP folks are women. That number? Lower for the Sask Party, who managed to elect 8 women to the legislature, or nearly a quarter of the caucus. So what does this mean for policies and politics in this province? In the second half of the show today, we'll be joined by former NDP MLA Danielle Chartier and former Sask Party MLA Nancy Hepner. We'll get their take on the latest election, and they'll weigh in on why representation matters. You can have your say too after 12:30. Give us a call at 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. But first, we're going to start the show by getting some insight into what it was like to be a Black woman running for the Sask Party in Saskatoon.
I mean, first of all, it was like, are we dreaming? A Black woman running for Sask Party? Like, what are you doing?
Maureen Torr will reflect on what she's learned from her experience door knocking in Saskatoon, and we'll be talking to a newly elected NDP candidate in Regina.
It's the opposition's job to bring to light failings of the government, but also the opposition's job to be propositional as well.
So we are talking representation today, so don't go away. Let's start with Maureen Torr.
It was exciting, actually. Some places were different. Some of them were welcoming, and some of them were not very nice.
Tell me about the ones who weren't very nice.
Why can't I tell you the ones that were very nice? Anyways, the ones that were not very nice, I mean, first of all, it was like, are we dreaming? A Black woman running for Sask Party? Like, what are you doing? And, I mean, they always came out across like, this is not the right party for you, and
they would say that to you?
Oh yeah, people are not sensitive at all, and my answer was, I don't believe what you're saying, because here I am, a Black woman in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, running for Sask Party. That is a plus for the party, because they gave me an opportunity. I don't think they care about people's backgrounds, race, or gender. So I did not believe that. And I told them that they were wrong, because I'm here and I'm campaigning as a Black woman. So
why do you think they thought that? Why do you think people would say to you, this isn't the right party for you?
To be honest, I do not know that. Maybe that's their assumption, which could be wrong. Because as a Black woman running for the party, I wouldn't say that they are racist, because I was there. So I don't know why they say that.
Wow. How did you respond, though, in the moment? Like, it's hard to be challenged like that in the moment. So how did that affect you personally?
Personally, it did not affect me in any way, because look at Canada. We are a diverse community or country whereby we have people from all walks of life or backgrounds. When I came to Saskatoon in 2004, in November, I did not see many people who looked like me in Saskatoon. But that has changed over the years. So I think because Sask Party has had many people who look the same, so having a person who looked different, some people didn't think that could be possible. Maybe that's why they said that.
Why did you want to run for the Sask Party?
First of all, I'm a Rotarian.
Rotarian, yeah.
And
doing a lot of volunteer work?
I do a lot of volunteer work. I care about the community, and I invest in people. And that takes me back to my family. I have a blended family. I have biological children, stepchildren, adopted children, foster children. So my whole life has been serving people, helping people, giving back to the community. And even when I wanted to run for Sask Party or for office, I have a background in community development, project management. My entire family back home are all politicians. I did political science when I went to University of Saskatchewan. So I love helping people, serving people, and that's just my passion. And to me, it's honestly not about the party and it's about serving people. You need a platform to do that.
And the Sask Party gave you a platform.
Yes. And I am forever grateful for that.
So what did you learn about the issues in Saskatoon as you were door knocking?
First of all, it was an eye-opener. I did not realize, and many of us really don't understand the challenges we have in our community or in our province unless you go door to door, because I have been door knocking for some good months. And it was a humbling experience for me because I learned that we have a lot we take for granted. There's so many challenges that we don't know as people unless you put yourself out there. There's a lot of mental health going on in our community, homelessness. I mean, healthcare is not the best. My ex-husband is a doctor, by the way. And shortage of doctors and nurses didn't start during Sask Party government. It has been a challenge because that's how we came here. He was hired from Uganda to come and work with Saskatoon Health Region. We have a daughter who is a doctor in Vancouver. So I've seen these things. And being on the door and hearing what people were telling me, I was like, wow, we have a lot of work to do as a community, as a province, as a country, because it takes everybody.
Did you hear a lot of frustration with the Sask Party from the people that you met on the doorstep?
Not really. I think it depends on how we look at things. What I was hearing actually was, we don't want to go back to the NDP. I wasn't here when NDP was in power, so I really couldn't tell. It was what I was hearing from people, saying that people left this province, people lost jobs. I have friends who are in Luther Heights. They told me this used to be a school. I'm like, and how did it turn into a care home? So I don't know. As a new candidate, I was hearing a lot of things. It was a lot of mixed feelings, but I don't think people were frustrated about Sask Party. They were happy that they have a strong economy. They have managed. The population has tripled, and I think that's a good thing.
What were your expectations going into the campaign? You were up against an incumbent, a strong NDP candidate. So what did you expect in this campaign?
First of all, I like challenges, and I'm not afraid of that. I wanted to serve. I wanted to put my name forward. I knew it was going to be a tough.
Race.
Yeah. I do respect Nathaniel Teed and what he's doing or what he has done, but they say you can't lose or win unless you're in the race. So I didn't know how it was going to go as a new Canadian. Even though I've been here 20 years, I still call myself a new Canadian. But that was the opening that was available, and I was not afraid to take it. So I went in knowing that it was going to be tough.
Yeah. And how were you reacting when the results started to roll in last night? And we know the outcome now. How do you feel about it?
I feel very proud of myself. And I am so grateful for the Sask Party for giving me the opportunity to serve. I got a call from Scott Moore appreciating for me to run. And I said, well, we did our best. Things didn't turn out the way we wanted. But he appreciates all the candidates. He drove and checked on everyone, which I think was a good motivator for all of us. I don't think many new candidates made it, but we tried our best.
That's the thing, though. There was a political scientist who pointed out a lot of the candidates for the Sask Party who were of a diverse background, like racially diverse, they were up against established NDP incumbents. And so the likelihood that those candidates would make it into the legislature were pretty low. I think he even used the phrase that the candidates were sacrificial lambs. So, in the campaign, you see a lot of diversity, but now who we're sending to the legislature is not overly diverse.
Yeah, and maybe that will come in due time. We don't know when. Many of us didn't win. But honestly, personally, this was not about winning. It was about learning. It was about personal growth. It was about understanding the community. It was about building strong relationships, which I actually did. And I don't feel bad about my percentage. I think it was pretty good for me as a person.
Yeah. So what do you think you'll do next? I mean, one of the questions that people are asking is how will people in the cities be represented, right? If the people who are in the legislature aren't part of the government, they're part of the official opposition. Will the issues that matter to people in the cities get the attention that they deserve?
First of all, this is what I've been telling people at the door. We need to stop relying, depending, and waiting on the government to do everything for us. I think there is a lot we can do as a community, as people. You have to represent yourself. You don't have to be in the government to get to have that representative or representation. So maybe it's time for us to take charge of our own problems, our own issues, and figure out how to solve them, and then the government will come along. I don't know.
So what's on the horizon for you? How do you plan to do that work?
I think we need to do more advocating for women, children, seniors, disabled people, because those are people that I'm very passionate about through my work with Joyce Center. We do a lot of work in the communities, and when you advocate for things that matter to you, you always find a solution to those problems. I don't count so much on the government. And I think maybe that's my background, because my dad was a police officer, and we always had community meetings every month where we talked about issues and found solutions as a community. But maybe sometimes people think that it's the government to do everything for us, and that can take a very long time. Mm-hmm. We have to use our voices. We have to speak up. We have to advocate for ourselves. We have to stand up for ourselves and take care of those things that really matter to us.
Mm-hmm. And you don't take any of that for granted, hey?
No, I don't.
You were meeting people on the doorstep who shared with you that back home they didn't have the ability to vote.
Mm-hmm. Many countries, women still cannot vote. So for me, it was a privilege, and I don't take it for granted. It was a very humbling experience to see people believing in me, trusting me, voting for me, and supporting me during my campaign.
What is the biggest lesson you learned, Maureen, on the campaign trail?
We need to invest in people. When you have people surrounding you, cheering for you, supporting you, encouraging you, you can do things that you never even dreamed of doing. That was my lesson.
Maureen, so nice to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and have a blessed day. Thank you for having me here.
Maureen Torr was a Sask Party candidate in Saskatoon-Meewasin. She was defeated by the NDP's Nathaniel Teed. Many of the NDP candidates in the cities are heading to the legislature, and that includes Sally Hauser, who will represent Regina University. And many of the NDP MLAs who will surround Sally will be women. I asked how she felt about that.
You know what? That's actually one of the things I'm the most delighted about. I've been involved with Equal Voice Saskatchewan, which is a great organization that seeks to elect women of all political stripes at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. Something that's very close to my heart, and it's one of the things that we always kind of have said is that you run women and they win, and we certainly elected a extremely strong cohort of returning women MLAs, but also some brand new ones in Regina and in Saskatoon, and just very, very delighted to see that first kind of caucus photo and to meet and get to work with so many brilliant women in the caucus as my colleagues.
Are you ready for what might come next? I think we know very well how difficult it can be for
Mm,
female politicians, the hate that can
yeah.
come their way on social media. Are you ready for that side of it? How are you preparing for that part of the job that just seems so inevitable these days?
Yeah, and it's that's a bummer, and you're right. It is a reality. I'm kind of in I guess a bit of a unique position that I've been a commentator both for CBC and other news outlets for kind of over a decade now, and so. I've already been on the receiving end of some of that kind of nasty online behavior in the past, so it won't be my first rodeo in that respect. Unfortunately, it's not something that you kind of ever get used to. I found very little of that over the course of the campaign. I think part of my kind of fear of people being nasty, kind of door knocking in person, was my experience kind of online, and then you realize it's just a lot harder to be mean and gross to somebody's face than it is sitting behind a keyboard. But I think it's just something that you try to, block and mute as much as possible, and don't let it grind you down.
Sally Hauser, an NDP MLA for Regina University. In a moment, we're going to be joined by former NDP MLA Danielle Chartier and former Sask Party MLA Nancy Hepner. We'll get their take on this election, and we'll have them weigh in on why representation matters. But you can have your say, too. Give us a shout at 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, Nancy Hepner was born into a political family. She got her start in politics door knocking for her father, Ben Hepner. He was the MLA for Martensville. She spent years working on Parliament Hill, but returned to Saskatchewan when her father died of cancer in 2006. She went on to win his seat in a by-election and served as the MLA for the Saskatchewan Party in Martensville and Warman from 2007 to the fall of 2020. She did not seek re-election, but she now works for the Saskatchewan Party, and she is with us here in our Saskatoon studio. We also have Danielle Chartier, who was elected as an NDP MLA in the Saskatoon Riversdale by-election in 2009, re-elected in 2011 and 2016, serving 11 years before choosing not to seek re-election in 2020. She now works for the Saskatoon Community Clinic. I'd like to welcome both of you to Blue Sky. So good to have you. Danielle, hello.
Hello, Alicia.
And Nancy, so good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Danielle, I'll start with you. I want to get both of your takes on these results, but wanting to look at it today a bit through that lens of women in politics, right? There's a lot we could talk about, but that's what we want to focus on today. So, Danielle, what stands out to you?
I think it's absolutely fabulous that the NDP has a larger caucus, of course, but that half of them at this point are women. In my experience, through 3 iterations of a different caucus, I can tell you that representation matters, both in tone at a caucus meeting, but also in terms of the issues that you bring forward. When you have voices, if you have a homogenous group of people, you don't know what you're missing, or you don't know what might be able to come forward. But when you have a diversity of voices, things like in vitro fertilization come forward, or Nicole Sarr between 2016 and 2019 worked really hard on interpersonal violence and passing some legislation there. So those voices matter to bring forward issues that might not have otherwise gotten attention.
Nancy, what's your take on the election results when it comes to women in politics?
I think it's a great return. Regardless of party, I think it's important to have women represented in the legislature for all the reasons that Danielle had pointed out. We do have a strong slate of candidates. Unfortunately, we also have about 8 female candidates that were defeated on Monday. And a lot of those being returning would have been
well-known people.
Yeah, like, Chris Tell and Lisa Lambert and Bronwyn Eyre. So these were very strong female voices sitting around our table. And it's unfortunate they were defeated. And sadly, I think about over half of them were defeated by men, which... it's unfortunate. They are great voices for their communities and brought forward issues that were important, not just to women, but to Saskatchewan people overall. And we're going to miss those voices at the table. But we do have new women who are coming on and returning ones. Colleen Young is coming back as an example. And then we've got new voices like Jamie Martins out of Martinsville. And women representing Batoche and Carrot River Valley. So,
and you said the number was 8. Is that how many were elected? How many women? I think it's 8, right?
I believe so.
So is that something that the Sask Party is, talking about, kind of taking stock of how many women did end up getting elected? Is that part of the conversation right now?
We have those conversations all the time, and people have asked me multiple times in the past, how do you get women to run? And my answer is just ask them. I don't think it's always a natural path for women to believe that they can be involved in politics. I think Donna Harpower, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm pretty sure she'd be the first one to tell you that the reason she ran is because somebody sat across the table from her in her kitchen and said, "Run for us, please." And she thought about it. She'd never thought about it before. So I think I don't think it's as complicated as people think it is. Just ask them. If you know of a strong woman, somebody who's community-minded, wants to get involved, just propose the idea. You just had Maureen Torr on here, who is one of the loveliest people I've been able to meet in the last few months. I've spent some time with her before and during the campaign. And I think she's one of those people. Somebody just said, why don't you run for us? And she would have been an amazing voice at our table. I realized she was in a tough constituency. But of all the women that we had running for us, 90% of the women that we had running for us were in winnable ridings. So they weren't sacrificial lambs. They weren't paper candidates. They were hardworking women in ridings that they could have won under different circumstances, of course, but they were almost all of them were in winnable ridings. And I think that says a lot about our party and wanting women to be at the table.
Danielle, what are your thoughts on that? Is it as simple as just asking, putting the saying, you could do this, why don't you?
I think that is a big part of it. I think women often don't see themselves in these roles necessarily, and I think it's been great in recent years where we see more women in leadership positions and electoral politics that you can, well, Nicole is doing this with a baby, I can do that too, or that might be something I think about. But I think you have to ask women. You have to ask women multiple times. Sometimes often a response you get, oh, I couldn't do that. There's no way I could do that. And so multiple returns, asking them again, letting them know how many ways they lead in other parts of their lives that you've seen and that you think that they'd be great. But I think taking it to the next level, teaching them how to run or what's involved, how you raise money, mentoring and supporting are two really important pieces. And Equal Voice is a great organization that it's a multi-partisan organization that actually I was very honored to be at that table with some Sask Party and Liberals at the time, folks who got that going, but creating those opportunities for learning because there's not a manual that comes with electoral politics.
And it'd be a thick one if
it would be huge.
Well, I'll ask you a bit more about Equal Voice because I'm really interested in that in the work that they've been doing. And we've got a caller on the line, so we've got a lot to get to on the show, so don't go anywhere. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky. We might as well go right to the phones because we've got James on the line in Saskatoon. Hello there, James.
Hey, Leisha. You know what? First of all, thanks so much for having Torah on there. I think she is such a beautiful representative of what the face of I think the Sask Party will be in the future. And I think it was sadly missed by a lot of media outlets, the diversity that was part of the Sask Party. And the statement that you referenced by the political scientists suggesting that only candidates were ran of ethnic background in ridings that weren't winnable, I find that honestly offensive to even repeat. And the reason I say this, look no further than the Saskatoon riding of Saskatoon Chief Mistawasis, where the Saskatchewan Party had a fantastic candidate by the name of Parminder Singh, who would have been and could have been one of Saskatchewan's most capable Minister of Finances, who had a background in finance, high finance, and all of a sudden, what ended up happening was the NDP won with Don McBean, Mr. Magoo. It's kind of, that's the frustrating thing is when broad stroke comments want to be placed out there, and it's no different than Said in Saskatoon Fairview. I think they worked hard to bring out their community and the community on large to represent their province, and maybe they weren't successful this time, but at least the Saskatchewan Party has to be acknowledged for giving them an opportunity. So to suggest that there is only one form of diversity, I think needs to be somewhat checked. So I thank you so much for allowing me to express my views. Thank you.
James, thanks for calling. That's James in Saskatoon. And I've got Nancy Hepner and Daniel Chartier, former politicians, with us here in our Saskatoon studio. You've been listening. Do you have some thoughts, Danielle, on what we just heard there from James?
I would completely agree that there is not one kind of diversity. We need a legislature that looks like the makeup of our province, that we need people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic experiences, ethnic or racial background, gender identity, people who are living their lives and whose voices deserve to be represented in that building. So this isn't about just women or men. This is about ensuring that we have a legislature that looks like the makeup of the province and can bring those lived experiences to discussions around a caucus or a cabinet table.
And Nancy, what do you think? The people who were elected for the Sask Party, when you look at who's going to be in the legislature, does it represent the diversity of the province?
I think our candidates will, and I will agree with just part of what the caller said. I think there was 13 candidates that we had running for us from different backgrounds, Maureen being one of them. But they were not all in ridings that were not winnable. Chief Mistawasis I was writing that down as he was making those comments. Chief Mistawasis was a totally winnable riding for us. Parminder was not. It was not a paper candidate in that riding. And we were really hoping that he was going to be able to win so that he could be that voice at the table for us. We are actively engaged in getting a diverse slate of candidates. They can't all always win, which is unfortunate, but it's not going to stop us from trying to get different people from different backgrounds around the table. Next election's 4 years away, so we've got another 4 years to recruit candidates and keep going back in the field to try to find those people. And I hope that people like Maureen and Parminder, who weren't successful this time, will come back and try it again the next election, and maybe they'll be more successful. But there was an active attempt on our part to have those voices at our table, but not everybody can be successful at the end of the day.
What are your thoughts then on how the party can now govern without as much diversity as maybe they were hoping for? How will the party approach that? How do you reflect the province? We all come with our own unique experiences, but my experience is different than somebody else's. And so how do you make sure that the province is fully reflected?
I think the best thing any government can do, opposition as well, it's just political parties, is meet with stakeholder groups in different communities and make sure that we're engaged on a day-to-day basis to find out what their concerns are. Let's say on immigration issues, if there's things that the government can be doing differently, we need to hear from the groups that have moved here or want their family or other relatives to come here. Things that are working.
So is the Sask Party going to have to work a little bit harder, do you think?
Well, we've had those conversations up until now, and I'm going to give you an example. This isn't on this comes on the women in politics side. Mm-hmm. If you look at Sarah Wright from Regina, who ran against Carla Beck in Regina Lakeview, and if you know her story, she's a cancer survivor, and she was sitting at home last year recovering from a surgery. And as she said, she had more brain power than body power, and she thought, what can I do to make things better for women? And so she reached out to both political parties, and our health minister, Everett Hindley, had phoned her back almost immediately. And they started up, I would say, a friendship, but also just a consultation process based on friendship to find out what exactly her concerns were. She's involved so intimately in the process in healthcare and cancer treatment to find out if there are things that we could be doing better. And those conversations have been going on. And then she ended up deciding to run for us. And I can tell you this, Sarah is not going to let her voice not be heard after this. She might not be sitting at our caucus table, but she still has a voice in our caucus because we will continue to talk to people like her.
And that's the sense I got from Maureen, too. Like, the work's not over.
It's not. And we'll keep talking. The candidates are representatives of their communities, whether or not they're elected. And I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to meet with them and have conversations with them to find out what those communities are feeling. We've done that in the past, and I think we'll continue that going forward.
We'd love to hear from people today. If you have thoughts on why representation matters when it comes to provincial politics, give us a call, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. I want to know a bit more about your own personal experiences as politicians, being women, and what your experience was like. Danielle, I'll start with you on that.
Well, I was elected in a by-election in 2009 with a 1-year-old and a 10-year-old as a Saskatoon MLA. I was able to bring my daughter for the first couple years with me, and that was wonderful. But like in terms of campaigning, I'm just thinking back to 2009, which arguably is a while ago, but it doesn't seem like
okay.
Yeah, which seems like yesterday to me. But in 2009, on the doorsteps, I had people asking me who was going to look after my kids while I was in Regina.
How'd you handle that?
Well, at the time, my then husband actually was taking a leave from work, so I could say my husband is taking a leave and he's coming to Regina with me. But that felt kind of that was our solution.
Yeah.
But
it's a tough question to get. Like it's loaded a bit, right? And you're like, ooh.
Well, and interestingly enough, the candidate against whom I was running was a dad of, I think it was 4 children, but had a 6-month-old. So I could be wrong, but I'm guessing he probably didn't get asked the same questions, although maybe he did. I know in those early days. At a caucus table, I was the only one with young kids. There were women in our caucus who had children, but generally, at about that time in life, many women entered politics when their kids were already launched. Like you've raised your kids and you are finally pursuing something that you think you can contribute to. Like just a silly little example, we had a caucus retreat, and this was not intentional. Nobody meant any harm by it, but I had a nursing daughter, and she came with me everywhere, and we had a caucus retreat in a beautiful location, 6 hours from Saskatoon in the north, in a place where it wasn't appropriate to have a toddler. So I had to miss the caucus retreat. And going forward, actually, I had really supportive male colleagues, but that was one of the challenges. I had a young child and, 2 kids, but one who traveled with me a lot, and that was hard.
Yeah. Nancy, what was the situation like for you, as we're talking today? What are some of the memories that come back for you in your time in the legislature?
I had a bit of a different start. I was elected in a by-election in 2007. I was single and had no children. And I know that people always say, we can't do this job without our family. I got to tell you, sometimes it's a whole lot easier if you don't have family. That's not a dig against my actual family. But just to say, if you don't have kids waiting for you at home or a spouse or a partner waiting for you at home, it's a little bit different. If you're stuck in Regina because there's a snowstorm, my neighbor would shovel my sidewalk for me. It's a little bit easier. Over the years, because of family circumstances, I started raising my nieces. And that made things infinitely more difficult. The younger one was going into grade 10, and I couldn't leave her at home on her own. Like, I trusted her, but I just wasn't feeling pretty good about that and didn't want her to be on her own. And so she got sent off to boarding school, which was the most heartbreaking experience of probably my entire life. I was strong while I moved her in and then just bawled all the way home. Because I didn't want her to be there. I wanted her to be at home with me, but you're not at home because you're in Regina. And so, that's tough. I don't think the kids hold anything against me for being gone for so long. They understood. They saw their grandpa do the same thing, being gone so much. Mm. So it's their reality. I kind of wish it wasn't their reality. I wish I would have been home for them more. Yeah. But they grew up to be great kids and still like having me around. So I guess that I'll count that as a success. Mm-hmm. But I see the difference now, having not run in 2020. I know I was just bugging you guys with baby pictures, but I became a grandma 7.5 months ago. And I got to tell you, I'm glad I'm home. I'm glad that I'm home to see her. And be able to visit with her whenever her parents will let her and her papu come visit them. So yeah, it's tough having family and kids is tough. And as Danielle said, I'm pretty sure the male candidates don't get asked, "What are you doing with your kids?" I don't think my dad was ever asked, "What are you doing with your kids?" Yeah. When he ran, we were older, but still, the question isn't asked. The expectation isn't that the dad should be at home looking after them. And then there's a bit of judgment on, well, you're going to leave your kids behind. And I think that's one of the things that probably holds a lot of women back is, what are people going to say? But I think the best example we can give our kids is to be strong, involved women who show up and do the work. And I think that's probably an extremely important example to leave our children, especially our kids.
Danielle, go ahead. Yeah, we got a caller, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the children are a really important thing, and it's not just around infancy or small children. It's as our kids grow older, teen years become very important. But another part of that is caregiving responsibilities in general. Oh yeah. Elder care. My dad broke his hip during the 2016 election campaign, and the next 3 years of I'm in the sandwich generation, so had a dad who needed lots of support here in Saskatoon, children who needed support here, and it was soul crushing.
Family responsibilities, it comes up for sure when we talk about women in politics, and I know that's just one piece of it, right? There's so many layers to this, so I have more questions related to that. But let's go to Crystal, who joins us on the line in Saskatoon right now. Hey there, Crystal.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What do you want to bring to the conversation today when it comes to representation?
Absolutely. I think representation matters so much. It's so great to see people of different cultures and backgrounds, and especially women in politics and getting seats at that high level. I do want to just make a comment in regards to representation of trans people. And I think that is something that is severely lacking. And many of the conversations that have occurred in the past year and some don't have that lens. And it's to the detriment of the youth. And if we want trans youth to grow up, we need them supported, and we need that lens. And it's incredible that there is someone from the queer community that was elected from the NDP. But again, that is not a trans person. That is not the same lived experience, and they are being very polarized and marginalized in this province. And that's essentially what I wanted to say today. So thanks.
Crystal, thanks for calling. Appreciate it. That's Crystal joining us in Saskatoon. Do either of you want to pick up on that? Nancy?
I would say the same thing to the trans community as women, people from diverse backgrounds. If you are looking to have a seat at the table, put your name on a ballot and run. There's nothing. It's the joy of our democracy. I've said this before. Way back when, you had to be a white man of means and property, and that was the only way that you got a seat at the table. And that is not the way it is anymore. And I think after this last election, when you see the diversity of all the candidates and those who were elected, I think our province is very open and welcoming, regardless of where you come from. To be elected. We've seen that in this last election. And so I would just suggest, if you're looking to be involved, get involved. If you're not ready to run, get involved in a campaign for whatever party you feel comfortable with. Start volunteering, talk to your MLA, talk to other candidates who have run. And if you feel comfortable doing it, just put on your name on the ballot. You got 4 years. We've got another election coming in 4 years. I hate that we're talking about that already, but you can never start too soon. So if you're interested in running, just start talking to people that you know, or make some phone calls and see if you're willing to run and put your name on a ballot.
Yeah. Danielle, do you want to add anything to that before I ask you my next question?
I just want to say that I believe it's incumbent on the government and includes the opposition when there aren't voices at the table. If we're not there yet in this particular election cycle, to Nancy's point, people can put their names forward and be encouraged to run. But I think in this next 4 years, any voices that are missing, it is governments need to reach out to and recognize the voices that they're missing to make sure that there's opportunity for meaningful dialogue in many different ways.
What are some of the other challenges that women in politics might face in 2024? So we've covered family responsibilities. Something that Sally Hauser mentioned, well, that I brought up, was just sort of how female politicians are navigating the online spaces and sort of, some of we've had a lot of documentation about the kinds of tweets and direct messages that female politicians get. But maybe there's something that I'm not aware of, or something a bit that might be surprising. But what are some of the other issues that women in politics face in 2024? Nancy?
Well, my answer was going to be social media.
Well, then feel free, because it's a big thing.
It is a vile, vile place. I think Danielle it was Maureen when she had said, or
maybe Sally.
Sally had said,
it was Sally Hauser.
When when you knock on the door, you're surprised at how reasonable the conversations are, because it's pretty hard to be nasty to your face. It's really easy to be nasty when you're just sitting in your basement in front of a keyboard. Mm-hmm. And I've had interviews before where people had asked me about that, and I made a concerted effort not to be on social media. My Facebook account is for me only. It's, actual friends that I know that I would go for coffee with. I didn't have Instagram. I didn't have a MLA Facebook account. I was not on Twitter, because that is the worst of the worst. And I made a concerted effort not to be on there.
Was that a hard choice? Because I even think as a journalist how important it is for me to be in these spaces, to engage with people in that way. Everyone's online. So was that a tough decision to make?
It's funny. I never had accounts, but I was on it all the time to see what was going on. So I know it's an important medium to communicate with people. But I also know me, if I could put something on there, the comments are going to be just gross and disgusting. And
are they worse for women than they are for men?
I think so. I do think that they are. And I know I would tell myself not to read the comments, but I know that I would sit at home after work with a glass of wine and just, doom scroll through all the horrible comments, and words stick in your head, even if they're not true. These people don't know you. They've never met you. They have no idea who you are as a person. Those words stick in your head. And I know that I, for my mental health, could not do that. So I chose not to, and I don't see. I think post-COVID, when there's a lot of people sitting at home expressing themselves online, I don't see that online world is going to get any better, which is unfortunate, because as we've seen through different surveys or whatever, people get most of their news online. And if you're not, it's the catch-22. Like, if you're not participating, are people hearing you? But is your participation good, honestly, for your mental health? Yeah. My approach was, my office was open 5 days a week. If you want to call me, call me. If you want to have a meeting, I'll come talk to you. If you want me to phone you back, I'll phone you back. I would rather meet with people face to face. And even the ones who got angry at me, but at least we're having a real conversation and not some, keyboard war, which I don't think solves anybody's problems.
That's why this show is great. The lines are open, folks. 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Danielle, what are you thinking about?
Well, thankfully, I think Nancy and I both left the legislature right when at a time where social media was ramping up. And that's not to say that there wasn't lots of other ways to communicate with us, or social media did exist, obviously, at that time. But I think the pandemic has certainly heightened it, and the political environment has certainly highlighted it. I, like Nancy, would read a newspaper article, and there's always the comments, and that's the worst possible thing. Don't read the comments, but you're just drawn to the comments. I think I want people to remember that politicians are people. And I think sometimes the general public forgets that.
And I just want to ask what I asked Nancy. Is it worse for women? Do you feel like you got more of it because of your gender?
I think possibly, or the kinds of comments that people made were related to my gender often. But I fortunately, I have very few examples of that. And people were always kind on the doorstep. I think I can count on one hand the number of times I had a door slammed. But it's that anonymity, and thinking that politicians are something different than another human being who has a family and their own values and a set of experiences that might be different than yours.
I want to ask you both now about policy. And Danielle, you already kind of alluded to this. So let's talk a bit more about how a diversity of politicians can influence the kinds of policies that we see. So you did mention IVF, and this came up. The Sask Party made this promise. It was something that the NDP had brought up numerous times in the legislature. But on the campaign, it was the first time that the Sask Party had talked about it. So Nancy, I want to start with you. And I guess my question is, I mean, you're on the inside, but what does that say to you that there was something very specific? And I mean, one could argue it's not just for women, right? It's for families, it's for single people, all of that. But how do you think women, Nancy, have influenced policy?
I think they have, and I think that was one example. And I'll repeat what I said earlier about Sarah Wright suggesting ideas. And that was the impetus, I believe, between being able to do cervical cancer screening at home, which I have to tell you, I'm very excited about as a woman, being able to have that option. I think it's going to lead to a greater level of engagement for women if you can catch it early. We know survival rates are astronomically higher. Those are important conversations to have. I don't think a room full of men would come up with cervical cancer screening as an issue to bring up during an election. So having women at the table is definitely important because of those types of things. And then, people from other backgrounds. I had mentioned earlier, like if there's issues where there's a glitch in the system in what Saskatchewan control when it comes to immigration, knowing that the federal government has most of the power over that. Saskatchewan has some autonomy over some programming. To listen to those voices, because you can't just operate. Regina becomes a bubble. Mm-hmm. Danielle will know this. You get so locked into what you do every day that you kind of lose sight of what average people are talking about or thinking. So I think it's incumbent to keep having those conversations to make sure. Do
you know where the IVF promise came from? Did that come from listening to families on the campaign trail? Did it come from listening to the opposition?
I honestly don't know what the source of that policy decision was. I'm glad it's there. I think it's important. I have friends who will be accessing that in months coming up, and I know it's very important to them. But as to what prompted that or what the genesis of that was, that I. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's fair.
I could try to speculate, but I might be wrong, so I'm not going to.
Danielle, I'd like to hear your perspective on how women in the legislature, how that shapes policy.
Again, I just will reiterate the discussion around the table. So in 2016, the NDP elected a caucus that was half women. It was a small caucus of 10 of us, but I'd been in a caucus where there were a quarter women at another time. So the things that you discuss, that you experience in your daily life, or you're connecting with constituents who are telling you about things, perhaps because they feel very comfortable telling you about certain things. Mental health, for example. We worked really hard between 2016 and 2020 trying to elevate the importance of mental health. And mental health, lots of these issues aren't women's issues, and I would argue that things that we label women's issues are actually issues of families, of communities, but they impact women differently than men. But in my experience around that caucus table, where there were half of us who were women, and just to note that we were very deliberate about trying to increase the numbers or more representative. The kinds of conversations we had, people were open, a little bit more vulnerable. We actually had a former cabinet minister come to one of our caucus retreats, and he commented about, wow, this is like a very different kind of table than I've ever experienced. But so people felt quite open to talk about the things that maybe previously didn't get raised. But again, I will point to Nicole Sarr, the private member's bill on interpersonal violence. We now have 10 days of job-protected leave, and some of them are paid, and other protections as well that came out of her work that made, and the government took the bill and it was passed, which was great. But those are things that sometimes aren't necessarily prioritized because of the people at the table. It doesn't, not because people are ignoring things purposefully, but they just are not front and center in their lives.
I have one last very quick question. How important is it to talk about this? Because even when you say, like, a lot of these things aren't women's issues, and even in some of my questions, I kind of wonder, like, well, why are we talking about gender in this way? And so on one hand, I know it's important, but then how we talk about it is also really important. So I just want to get your final thoughts on, is it still an important conversation to be having right now, talking about, women in politics? Nancy?
I agree with Danielle. We said that when we were doing these panels in 2020, there was a lot of, I agree with Danielle, and I'm sure my colleagues are raising eyebrows. It's like, Nancy's not agreeable with anybody. That these are not necessarily women's issues. When you look at, affordability, being able to buy groceries, getting your kids to soccer, hockey, or dance lessons, and a whole host of things, healthcare, education, these are not women's issues. But I think what's important in getting women involved in politics is people need to see or want to see themselves reflected and who is sitting around that table, regardless of what that looks like for them, whether it's, an ethnicity, that kind of background, whether it's being a woman,
Trans, like we heard from a caller today. Yeah.
Queer community. People want to see themselves reflected in their government. I think we've got a long way to go on that, but I think we've made great strides in doing that. So, yeah, not necessarily women's issues, but I think women want to see themselves at that table, and they're going to be more engaged in the process then, too.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for doing it with us. I know you're coming off a very busy run, Nancy. Danielle, you too. So thanks so much for being our guest today. Danielle Chartier is a former NDP MLA. Nancy Hepner, a former Sask Party MLA, both joining me here in our Saskatoon studio.